What do you do when the man you thought you would marry betrays you in the worst possible way? Do you cry? Do you beg him to explain? Or do you walk away, and plan a revenge so powerful that it will haunt him for the rest of his life? Because sometimes heartbreak doesn't destroy you. Sometimes, it introduces you to a version of yourself you never knew existed. And for Amelia Carter, that version would change 3 lives forever. It was a quiet evening when Amelia pulled her car into the long circular driveway of the Hawthorne estate. The mansion stood like a monument of wealth against the fading sunset, its tall windows glowing softly with golden light. She had been there dozens of times before. After all, for nearly 2 years, she had been dating Daniel Hawthorne, the charming heir to one of the most powerful business families in the city. To the outside world, their relationship looked perfect. Daniel was handsome, confident, and born into unimaginable wealth. Amelia, on the other hand, came from a very different world. She was a hard-working social worker who spent most of her days helping people who had nothing. But somehow, their worlds had collided. And for a long time, she believed love was enough to bridge the gap. At least, that's what she believed until 3 days ago. For 3 days Daniel had ignored her calls. 3 days of unanswered messages. 3 days of silence after their last argument. Amelia had told herself she was overthinking it. Daniel was busy. Daniel always had meetings. Daniel's life was complicated. But tonight something inside her refused to stay quiet any longer. She stepped out of the car and walked toward the massive oak doors of the mansion, her heels echoing softly against the stone pavement. The door was unlocked. That should have been the first warning. Inside, the house was strangely silent. The usual staff were nowhere in sight, and the grand hallway stretched before her like an empty cathedral of marble and chandeliers. "Daniel," she called softly. No answer. Her heartbeat began to quicken as she moved toward the staircase. Something felt wrong. Halfway up the stairs she heard it. A sound. Soft laughter. And then a voice she recognized instantly. But it wasn't Daniel's voice alone. Amelia felt the world tilt slightly beneath her feet as she followed the sound down the hallway toward Daniel's private suite. The bedroom door was slightly open. Just enough to see inside. Later, Amelia would remember that moment with perfect clarity, the way time seemed to slow, the way every instinct inside her screamed for her to turn around and leave. But she didn't. She pushed the door open. And in that instant, the life she thought she knew shattered completely. There on the bed, tangled in silk sheets, were 2 people she trusted more than anyone else in the world. Daniel Hawthorne. And her best friend, Victoria. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. And in that silence, something inside Amelia Carter broke. But she didn't scream. She didn't cry. Instead, she did something far more dangerous. She turned around, and walked away. What Amelia didn't know was that someone else had witnessed everything from the shadows of the hallway. A man far more powerful than Daniel. A man whose name alone made politicians nervous and business rivals disappear. Daniel's father. And when he watched Amelia walk away from betrayal with her head held high, he realized something. Something that would soon destroy his son's world forever. Because sometimes the most devastating revenge begins with a marriage. To understand how Amelia Carter ended up standing in the hallway of the Hawthorne mansion with her heart breaking in silence, you have to understand the kind of woman she was long before she met Daniel Hawthorne. Amelia wasn't the kind of woman who chased wealth or power. She grew up in a small apartment on the edge of the city, raised by 2 parents who believed that the value of a person had nothing to do with the size of their bank account. Her father was a high school teacher who spent more time worrying about his students' futures than his own paycheck. Her mother worked long shifts as a nurse, often coming home late at night exhausted but still smiling. They didn't have much. But Amelia never felt poor. Her parents filled their home with something far more valuable than money: kindness, discipline, and a deep belief that helping others mattered more than impressing them. By the time Amelia finished college, that belief had shaped the direction of her entire life. While many of her classmates chased corporate jobs and six-figure salaries, Amelia chose a different path. She became a social worker, dedicating her time to helping women who were trying to rebuild their lives after abuse, homelessness, and exploitation. The work was exhausting. Sometimes heartbreaking. But it was meaningful. And for Amelia, that was enough. At least. It was until the night she met Daniel Hawthorne. It happened almost 2 years earlier at a charity gala hosted by one of the city's largest nonprofit organizations. Amelia had only attended because her supervisor insisted that someone from their office needed to represent their program. She still remembered how out of place she felt that evening. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and expensive gowns. Men in tailored suits moved through the room with the easy confidence of people who had never worried about rent payments or grocery bills. Amelia had stood near the edge of the room in a simple black dress, quietly wondering how long she needed to stay before leaving without offending anyone. That was when Daniel noticed her. Daniel Hawthorne was the kind of man people noticed immediately when he entered a room. Tall, sharply dressed, and effortlessly confident, he carried himself like someone who had grown up knowing the world would always open doors for him. Women watched him. Men respected him. And when Daniel decided he wanted something, he rarely heard the word no. That night, what Daniel wanted was Amelia. At first she assumed he was simply being polite. Men like Daniel didn't usually pursue women like her. Their lives moved in completely different circles. But Daniel didn't seem to care about circles. He asked questions about her work. He listened when she spoke. And by the end of the night, he insisted on driving her home himself. Over the following months, Daniel proved surprisingly persistent. Flowers appeared at her office. Dinner invitations followed. Weekend trips were suggested. Slowly, despite her doubts, Amelia began to believe that maybe their relationship could actually work. Daniel was charming, attentive, and generous. He made her laugh in ways few people could. And when he looked at her, it felt like she was the only person in the room. But there was always one shadow hanging over their relationship. The Hawthorne family. Everyone in the city knew the Hawthorne name. Officially, the Hawthorne empire was built on legitimate industries, construction, shipping, luxury real estate, and private investments that stretched across several countries. But rumors followed the family everywhere. Whispers about deals that happened in private rooms. Competitors who suddenly disappeared from business entirely. Political connections that allowed the Hawthornes to operate in ways others never could. At the center of it all was Daniel's father. Alexander Hawthorne. A man rarely seen in public but deeply respected, and quietly feared, by nearly everyone who knew his name. Amelia had only met him once. It was during a dinner at the mansion about 6 months into her relationship with Daniel. She remembered how uncomfortable she felt walking through the massive hallways of that house, surrounded by paintings that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. Alexander Hawthorne had joined them briefly that evening. He spoke little. Observed everything. His dark eyes seemed to study Amelia carefully, as if evaluating something he hadn't quite decided about yet. The conversation lasted no more than 10 minutes before he excused himself. But even in that short time, Amelia had felt something unusual. Alexander Hawthorne wasn't loud or aggressive. He didn't raise his voice. Yet his presence carried a quiet authority that made even confident people lower their tone around him. Later that night, Amelia asked Daniel if his father disliked her. Daniel laughed. "My father doesn't dislike anyone," he said casually. "He just doesn't trust people easily." At the time, Amelia didn't realize how important that statement would become. Because on the night everything fell apart, Alexander Hawthorne would be watching far more closely than anyone expected. And the quiet woman Daniel had underestimated would soon become the most dangerous decision he had ever made. For the first few months, Amelia convinced herself that the whispers about the Hawthorne family were exaggerated. Rumors had a way of growing larger than reality, especially when powerful people were involved. And when she was with Daniel, it was easy to forget about the stories. Daniel had a way of making the world feel smaller and simpler. He took her to places she had only seen in magazines, elegant restaurants with candlelight tables, quiet rooftop lounges overlooking the city skyline, private weekend trips to beach resorts where the ocean stretched endlessly into the horizon. At first, Amelia resisted the luxury. She had never been comfortable with expensive things. The first time Daniel bought her a designer handbag that cost more than 3 months of her rent, she tried to give it back. Daniel only laughed. "You're allowed to enjoy nice things," he told her. "But that's not my world," she replied. Daniel reached for her hand. "Maybe it is now." Those words should have made her uneasy. Instead, they made her hopeful. For the first time in a long time, Amelia allowed herself to imagine a future that looked different from the one she had always planned. Daniel talked about traveling together. About buying a house outside the city. About building something permanent. Sometimes he even joked about marriage. "You'd make a terrible trophy wife," he once teased. Amelia laughed. "Good. I don't plan on quitting my job. That's one of the reasons I like you," he said. "You're not like the other women I've dated." At the time, Amelia believed that was a compliment. Looking back, she realized something else. Daniel liked the idea that she was different. But he never truly respected what made her different. Still, the relationship moved forward. Months turned into a year. Daniel introduced her to his social circle, wealthy friends who spent their weekends at exclusive clubs and private parties where champagne flowed endlessly and conversations revolved around investments and influence. Amelia always felt slightly out of place in those rooms. Not because anyone treated her poorly, but because she could feel the quiet judgment behind polite smiles. Daniel's friends were polite to her, but they never really understood her. To them, Amelia Carter was an interesting curiosity. The humble social worker dating one of the city's most eligible bachelors. Among Daniel's friends, one person stood out more than the others. Victoria Langford. Victoria had been part of Daniel's life long before Amelia appeared. She was beautiful, ambitious, and effortlessly confident. The kind of woman who seemed perfectly comfortable in a room filled with power and money. At first, Amelia assumed Victoria disliked her. But over time, Victoria surprised her. She was friendly, supportive, even protective in certain situations. When other women at parties made subtle comments about Amelia's modest background, Victoria was often the first person to defend her. "You'd be surprised how rare genuine people are in this city," Victoria once told her. That conversation was the beginning of their friendship. They started meeting for coffee, shopping trips, long conversations about life, relationships, and ambition. Amelia trusted her. Which was why the betrayal that waited in Daniel's bedroom would eventually feel so much worse. But long before that moment arrived, there were warning signs. Small things Amelia ignored. Daniel occasionally disappearing for hours without explanation. Business associates who looked more like bodyguards than investors. Phone calls Daniel would step outside to answer in private. And one strange moment that stayed with her longer than the others. It happened about 4 months before everything collapsed. Daniel had invited her to a large party at the Hawthorne mansion. The house was filled with influential guests, politicians, CEOs, and people whose names appeared regularly in the financial news. Amelia had stepped outside onto the balcony for fresh air. That was when she saw Alexander Hawthorne standing alone near the garden below. He wasn't speaking to anyone. Just watching the party from a distance. When Amelia turned to leave, he looked up. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Even from that distance, she could feel the intensity of his gaze. Not judgment. Not hostility. Something else. Observation. As if he were studying her the same way someone studies a complicated puzzle. Later that evening, as she and Daniel prepared to leave the party, Alexander briefly approached them. He shook Amelia's hand. His grip was firm, his expression calm. "You seem to care deeply about your work," he said. Amelia nodded. "I do." Alexander studied her quietly for a moment before replying. "That's rare." Then he walked away. At the time, Amelia didn't think much about that interaction. But months later, on the night she walked into Daniel's bedroom and saw her world shatter, she would realize something important. Alexander Hawthorne had been paying attention to her long before she ever realized it. And the night of the betrayal would give him the opportunity to act on something he had already begun to consider. Something that would change all of their lives forever. The moment Amelia pushed open Daniel Hawthorne's bedroom door, time seemed to slow down. Later, she would remember every detail of that moment with painful clarity. The soft golden sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. The silk sheets twisted carelessly across the massive bed in the center of the room. And the two people tangled together on top of it. Daniel Hawthorne. And Victoria Langford. For a moment, Amelia's mind refused to process what her eyes were seeing. It was as if reality had split into two separate worlds. In one world, this was a nightmare that would disappear the moment she blinked. In the other, it was the truth she had been too blind to see. Victoria was the first to notice her. Her expression shifted instantly, from surprise to something colder. Something almost calculating. Daniel turned seconds later. The moment he saw Amelia standing in the doorway, the color drained from his face. "Amelia." His voice came out strained, breathless. He scrambled to grab the sheet, wrapping it around himself like it could somehow protect him from the damage already done. "This isn't what it looks like," he said quickly. For a brief second, Amelia almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because the lie was so painfully predictable. "Really?" Her voice was calm. Calmer than she felt. Because from where she stood, the situation seemed painfully obvious. "It looks like my boyfriend is sleeping with my best friend," she said quietly. Daniel opened his mouth again, searching desperately for words that could somehow repair the moment. Victoria sat up slowly beside him. Unlike Daniel, she didn't look embarrassed. She didn't look ashamed. If anything, she looked relieved. "Well," Victoria said coolly, brushing her hair back from her face, "I suppose you were going to find out eventually." The words hit Amelia harder than she expected. Daniel turned toward Victoria in disbelief. "Victoria, stop." But Victoria simply shrugged. "Why?" she replied. It's not like she didn't suspect something. Amelia felt a strange ringing in her ears. It was the sound of trust collapsing. "How long?" Amelia asked quietly. The question surprised even her. Daniel hesitated. But Victoria answered immediately. 6 months. The honesty landed like a physical blow. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Half a year of pretending everything was normal. Amelia looked at Daniel. He couldn't meet her eyes. That told her everything she needed to know. "You were never right for him anyway," Victoria continued casually. Her voice carried the sharp edge of someone who had been waiting a long time to say these things. "You're too safe." She said the word like it was an insult. Amelia stared at her. "Safe?" Victoria gestured around the massive bedroom. "This world is complicated, Amelia." Her eyes flicked briefly toward Daniel. "Daniel needs someone who understands how things really work." "And you do?" Amelia asked. Victoria smiled faintly. "I understand that powerful men don't build empires by following the rules." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, clearly losing control of the situation. "Enough," he snapped. "Both of you." But it was too late. The damage was already done. Amelia felt something inside her chest begin to crack. Not loudly. Not violently. Just a quiet breaking of something she had once believed in. Love. Trust. Loyalty. All of it felt suddenly fragile and meaningless. But she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart. Slowly, Amelia took a step backward toward the hallway. "I'm done," she said simply. Daniel immediately moved forward. "Amelia, wait." But she shook her head. "No." Her voice was calm. Stronger than she expected. "Whatever this was, it's over." Victoria leaned back against the pillows, watching the scene with detached amusement. "You'll get over it," she said. Amelia looked at her one last time. And in that moment, she realized something strange. The woman she had trusted for over a year suddenly felt like a complete stranger. Without another word, Amelia turned and walked out of the bedroom. Her footsteps echoed softly through the long hallway. Behind her, she could hear Daniel calling her name. But she didn't stop. She refused to look back. Because if she looked back, she might break. Halfway down the staircase, Amelia suddenly felt something strange. The unmistakable feeling of being watched. She stopped. Slowly, she turned toward the shadows near the entrance to the mansion's private library. A man stepped forward. Tall. Composed. Dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit. Alexander Hawthorne. Daniel's father. The most powerful man in the city. He had clearly been standing there for some time. Watching everything. His expression was calm. Almost thoughtful. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Alexander Hawthorne did something unexpected. He smiled. Not warmly. But with a quiet sense of recognition. "You handled that better than most people would," he said calmly. Amelia felt her heartbeat quicken. "Mr. Hawthorne." "Alexander," he corrected. His dark eyes studied her carefully. "You walked away from betrayal without causing a scene." He paused. That kind of composure is rare. Amelia wasn't sure how to respond. She only knew one thing. She wanted to leave. "I should go," she said quietly. She stepped past him, moving toward the front door. But just before she reached it, Alexander spoke again. His voice was calm. Measured. Almost curious. "Tell me something, Amelia." She stopped. "What?" Alexander's gaze was steady. "If you had the chance to make Daniel regret what he just did." He paused slightly. "Would you take it?" Amelia frowned. "What are you talking about?" Alexander's expression didn't change. But the next words he spoke would change her life forever. "I'm talking about revenge." He took a slow step closer. "And I have a proposition that might interest you." For a few seconds after Alexander Hawthorne spoke, Amelia simply stared at him. The word he had just said hung in the air between them. Revenge. It sounded strange coming from someone as calm and controlled as him. Amelia folded her arms slightly, trying to steady herself. "I'm not interested in revenge," she said quietly. Alexander studied her for a moment before responding. "That's not true." His voice was calm, almost analytical. "You may not want to admit it yet, but the part of you that walked away from that room without crying is not the kind of person who simply forgets something like this." Amelia felt a flicker of irritation. "You don't know me." Alexander gave a small, thoughtful nod. "No," he admitted. "But I know people." He moved slowly across the foyer, his footsteps echoing softly across the marble floor. "And I know my son." Amelia didn't respond. Alexander continued. "Daniel has spent most of his life believing there are no consequences for his actions." His voice remained even. "Money protects him. Influence protects him. And until tonight, everyone around him has allowed that illusion to continue." Amelia looked toward the staircase behind them. From somewhere upstairs, she could still hear Daniel moving around, probably trying to figure out how to fix the disaster he had created. "What does that have to do with me?" she asked. Alexander's eyes returned to her. Everything. He paused briefly before continuing. You see, Amelia. I have spent years trying to teach my son responsibility. His expression hardened slightly. But Daniel prefers easy victories. Amelia frowned. And you think humiliating him will fix that? Alexander shook his head slowly. No. He paused. But it will teach him something far more important. What? Alexander's answer came without hesitation. That actions have consequences. For a moment the room was silent again. Amelia felt an uneasy sensation growing in her chest. Something about the way Alexander spoke made it clear that this conversation was not casual. It was calculated. Deliberate. You still haven't explained what you want from me, she said carefully. Alexander stopped walking. He turned toward her fully now, his posture relaxed but his gaze focused. I want to offer you an opportunity. Amelia narrowed her eyes slightly. What kind of opportunity? Alexander's voice dropped slightly lower. The kind that ensures my son never forgets the mistake he made tonight. Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. You're talking about revenge again. Yes. And you think I'm the person to help you do that? Alexander studied her quietly for several seconds. Yes, he said simply. Amelia let out a soft breath of disbelief. That makes no sense. Alexander reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a small business card. He held it between his fingers but didn't hand it to her yet. Daniel has spent his entire life competing with me, he said calmly. Competing for influence, respect, and control of this family's legacy. Amelia didn't like where this conversation was going. And? Alexander's eyes held hers. And nothing would wound his pride more deeply than watching someone he underestimated rise above him. Amelia shook her head slowly. You're speaking in riddles. Alexander's expression remained perfectly composed. Then allow me to be direct. He paused. And then he said the one sentence Amelia would replay in her mind for the rest of her life. Marry me. The words hit her like a sudden shock. For a moment Amelia was certain she had heard him incorrectly. Excuse me? Alexander Hawthorne didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He simply repeated the same words. Marry me. Amelia let out a disbelieving laugh. That's ridiculous. Alexander tilted his head slightly. Is it? You're Daniel's father. Yes. You're at least 20 years older than me. 22. And you think marrying you would somehow be revenge? Alexander finally handed her the business card. His expression remained calm. Imagine Daniel's reaction when the woman he cheated on becomes his stepmother. Amelia stared at him in stunned silence. The idea was so outrageous, so completely unexpected, that for several seconds she couldn't even form a response. Alexander continued calmly. He humiliated you tonight. His voice was steady. Imagine returning that humiliation in a way he will never forget. Amelia shook her head again. You can't possibly be serious. Alexander met her gaze without hesitation. I'm always serious when it comes to business. He paused. And make no mistake, this would be business. Amelia looked down at the card in her hand. It had only an address and a time written on it. Dinner tomorrow night, Alexander said. If you come, we discuss the terms. And if I don't? Alexander turned toward the library again. Then this conversation never happened. He stopped at the doorway before adding one final sentence. But if you do come. He glanced back at her. Your life will never be the same again. And as Amelia walked out of the Hawthorne mansion that night, she realized something terrifying. A small part of her was already wondering what it would feel like to say yes. Amelia didn't remember the drive home. Later, she would realize she had passed 3 red lights and barely noticed the traffic around her. Her mind was still trapped in the Hawthorne mansion. Still replaying the moment she saw Daniel and Victoria together. Still hearing Alexander Hawthorne's calm voice echoing in her head. Marry me. The word sounded absurd. Impossible. Yet somehow, they refused to leave her thoughts. By the time Amelia reached her apartment building, the city streets were almost empty. The cool night air hit her face as she stepped out of the car, but it did little to calm the storm inside her mind. Her small apartment suddenly felt unfamiliar. For the first time in years, she didn't know what to do next. She dropped her purse onto the kitchen counter and walked slowly to the window overlooking the quiet street below. The business card Alexander had given her was still in her hand. A restaurant address. 8 o'clock tomorrow night. A single meeting that could change everything. Amelia placed the card on the table and stepped away from it like it might explode. This is insane, she muttered to herself. Normal people didn't marry their ex-boyfriend's father. Normal people cried, blocked phone numbers, and eventually moved on. But as she stood there in the silence of her apartment, something uncomfortable began to surface in her mind. Daniel had already moved on. He hadn't even waited until their relationship ended. 6 months. 6 months of lies. And Victoria. The woman Amelia had trusted. The woman she had confided in about her fears, her doubts, and her hopes for the future. All of it had been a lie. The realization burned deep in her chest. Her phone buzzed suddenly on the counter. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. She stared at it for several seconds before rejecting the call. The phone buzzed again. Another call. Another message. Then another. Within minutes, her phone screen filled with notifications. Daniel, please pick up. Daniel, this isn't what you think. Daniel, we need to talk. Amelia let out a bitter laugh. The audacity was almost impressive. Slowly, she picked up the phone and blocked his number. The silence that followed felt strangely peaceful. But Alexander's words quickly returned to her mind. Imagine Daniel's reaction when the woman he cheated on becomes his stepmother. The idea was outrageous. Cruel. Almost theatrical in its humiliation. And yet, the more she thought about it, the more she realized something unsettling. It would work. Daniel's pride was enormous. His reputation mattered more to him than anything. If she married Alexander Hawthorne, the humiliation would follow him everywhere. Business meetings. Family gatherings. Public events. Everywhere. The city would talk. People would whisper. And Daniel would never be able to escape it. Amelia shook her head and pushed the thought away. This is ridiculous, she whispered again. But sleep refused to come that night. Instead, Amelia sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open. If she was going to even consider something this dangerous, she needed to know who Alexander Hawthorne really was. She typed his name into the search bar. Hundreds of results appeared instantly. News articles. Business profiles. Financial reports. The official version of Alexander Hawthorne was impressive. A billionaire investor. Chairman of multiple corporations. Philanthropist. Donor to hospitals and education programs. But the deeper Amelia searched, the more complicated the picture became. Rumors. Investigations. Quiet allegations that never led to formal charges. Competitors who disappeared from the market almost overnight. Politicians who suddenly changed their positions after private meetings with him. Nothing was ever proven. But the pattern was clear. Alexander Hawthorne was a man who understood power. And knew exactly how to use it. Around 2 in the morning, Amelia leaned back in her chair, exhausted. She stared at the business card again. Dinner tomorrow night. 8 o'clock. The simplest decision would be to ignore it. Delete the card. Forget the conversation ever happened. Move on. But something inside her resisted that idea. Because walking away would mean letting Daniel and Victoria continue their lives as if nothing had happened. As if her pain meant nothing. Amelia closed her laptop slowly. For a long time, she sat in silence. Then she reached for the card again. Her fingers traced the address written in black ink. And for the first time that night, a dangerous thought entered her mind. What if this wasn't just revenge? What if this was an opportunity? Not just to hurt Daniel, but to completely change the direction of her own life. Outside, the first light of morning began to appear over the city skyline. Amelia stared at the card one last time before placing it carefully into her purse. She still hadn't made a decision. But one thing was certain. Tomorrow night, she was going to that dinner. The restaurant Alexander Hawthorne had written on the card sat on one of the most exclusive streets in the city. Amelia had walked past it before. But she had never stepped inside. Even from the outside, the place radiated quiet wealth. There were no bright signs, no loud music, no crowds waiting outside. Just a discreet entrance and a valet stand where luxury cars came and went like silent shadows. When Amelia stepped out of the taxi, her heart was already racing. For a brief moment, she considered turning around. This was the moment where everything could still go back to normal. She could walk away. Forget the conversation. Forget Alexander Hawthorne. But then she remembered Daniel's face in that bedroom. The lies. The betrayal. And the calm satisfaction in Victoria's voice. Amelia squared her shoulders and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the restaurant was breathtaking. Soft lighting illuminated polished marble floors and dark wooden walls lined with rare art pieces. The air smelled faintly of expensive wine and something warm and buttery drifting from the kitchen. A host greeted her immediately. "Miss Carter?" Amelia blinked in surprise. "Yes. Mr. Hawthorne is expecting you." Of course he was. The host guided her through the restaurant to a quiet corner table overlooking the city skyline. Alexander Hawthorne was already there. He stood as she approached. Even in a simple black suit, he carried the same calm authority she remembered from the mansion. "You came," he said. His tone suggested he had never doubted she would. Amelia sat down across from him. "I haven't agreed to anything yet." Alexander nodded slightly. "Of course." A waiter appeared instantly, placing a glass of wine in front of her. Amelia frowned slightly. "I didn't order this." Alexander gestured toward the glass. "You mentioned once that you prefer red wine." Amelia looked up at him. "How do you know that?" Alexander took a slow sip from his own glass. "I make it a habit to understand the people who spend time around my family." The casual way he said it made Amelia realize something unsettling. Alexander Hawthorne knew far more about her than she had realized. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Amelia leaned forward slightly. "Let's skip the games," she said. "You proposed something completely insane yesterday." Alexander nodded calmly. "Yes. And you expect me to seriously consider marrying you just to embarrass your son?" Alexander set his glass down. "Not just to embarrass him." He paused. "To teach him." Amelia raised an eyebrow. "Teach him what?" Alexander's expression hardened slightly. "That actions have consequences." His voice remained calm. "Daniel has spent his entire life believing that money and charm allow him to escape responsibility." He leaned back in his chair. "Sometimes the only way to teach a lesson is to make it unforgettable." Amelia crossed her arms. "And where exactly do I benefit from this lesson?" Alexander's eyes held hers. "You gain protection." He continued. "Financial freedom. And influence." Amelia scoffed softly. "You're describing a business arrangement." "That's exactly what it would be," Alexander replied. "No illusions. No emotional expectations. Just a partnership." Amelia studied him carefully. And what happens after the revenge? Alexander didn't hesitate. We agree on terms before the marriage. Duration. Financial settlement. Your independence. His voice remained calm. You will not be trapped. The honesty surprised her. Alexander reached into his jacket and placed a small velvet box on the table. Amelia stared at it. What's that? A symbol. He opened the box slowly. Inside was a diamond ring that caught the soft candlelight and scattered it across the table like tiny sparks. Amelia felt her breath catch. This belonged to my grandmother, Alexander said. She believed marriage could be both strategy and survival. He pushed the box slightly closer to her. If you accept this, the world will know you are no longer Daniel's past. You will become something else entirely. Amelia stared at the ring. Her heart pounded in her chest. She imagined Daniel's reaction. The disbelief. The humiliation. The moment he realized what he had lost. But something else also stirred inside her. Not just revenge. Power. The kind she had never experienced before. Slowly, Amelia looked back up at Alexander Hawthorne. Let's say I agree, she said quietly. What happens next? Alexander's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Then we begin preparing for the wedding. The word felt surreal. Amelia looked back down at the ring. Her entire life had been simple until now. Safe. Predictable. But that version of her life had ended the moment she opened Daniel's bedroom door. Slowly, Amelia reached toward the ring. She lifted it from the velvet box. For a moment she simply held it in her hand. Then she looked back at Alexander. Her voice was calm. But her decision would change everything. All right, she said. Let's get married. The morning after Amelia agreed to marry Alexander Hawthorne felt strangely quiet. For the first time in days, she woke up without the heavy weight of uncertainty pressing down on her chest. But the moment she opened her eyes, reality quickly returned. She was engaged. Not to Daniel. But to his father. Amelia sat up slowly in bed, staring at the diamond ring resting on her nightstand. Even in the soft morning light, the stone seemed almost unreal. A single decision had changed the direction of her entire life. Her phone buzzed on the table beside the bed. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Hello? Good morning, Miss Carter. The voice on the other end was calm and professional. This is Mr. Hawthorne's assistant. He asked me to inform you that arrangements have already begun. Amelia blinked. Arrangements? Yes. A brief pause. Your relocation, security protocols, and wedding planning. Amelia sat up straighter. That was fast. Mr. Hawthorne doesn't believe in wasting time. Of course he didn't. Your things will be packed this afternoon, the assistant continued. A car will arrive shortly to bring you to the Hawthorne estate. Amelia glanced around her small apartment. The same apartment she had lived in for the last 3 years. The same place where she had laughed, cried, and built the life she thought she wanted. And now she was leaving it behind. Just like that. By the time the black car arrived outside her building, 2 men in tailored suits were already waiting in the hallway. They introduced themselves politely but briefly. Security. They moved efficiently through her apartment, packing her belongings with the kind of speed that suggested they had done this many times before. Amelia watched in silence. Her life was being folded into boxes. Every book. Every photograph. Every memory. Within 2 hours, the apartment was empty. The drive to the Hawthorne estate felt surreal. The massive iron gates opened slowly as the car approached, revealing the long driveway that led toward the mansion. Amelia had visited the house before with Daniel. But arriving now felt different. This time, she wasn't a guest. The car stopped in front of the entrance. Alexander Hawthorne was waiting at the top of the steps. He looked almost exactly the same as the night before. Perfectly composed. Perfectly calm. As if nothing in the world could truly surprise him. When Amelia stepped out of the car, his gaze studied her carefully. "You arrived quickly," he said. "You told me you don't waste time," Amelia replied. Alexander nodded slightly. "That's true." For a moment they simply stood there, looking at each other. Then Alexander gestured toward the entrance. "Welcome home." The words felt strange. But Amelia followed him inside. The mansion looked just as impressive as she remembered. High ceilings. Massive windows. Polished marble floors that reflected the afternoon sunlight. But this time, something felt different. The staff greeted her respectfully as she passed. Not as Daniel's girlfriend. But as something else entirely. Someone important. Alexander led her down a long hallway toward a private wing of the house. "These will be your rooms," he said. Amelia stepped inside and stopped in amazement. The space was enormous. A bedroom larger than her entire apartment. A sitting area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. A private study. And a walk-in closet already filled with designer clothing she had never seen before. "You bought all this?" she asked. Alexander shook his head. "Consider it preparation." Amelia walked slowly through the room. Everything was elegant. Beautiful. But also intimidating. "You understand," she said carefully, "that my life has never looked anything like this." Alexander's voice remained calm. "You'll adjust." He paused. "People always do." Amelia turned toward him. "And your son?" For the first time since she had met him, Alexander's expression darkened slightly. "He knows." Amelia's stomach tightened. "And?" Alexander gave a small shrug. "He's not pleased." "That's an understatement," Amelia muttered. Alexander studied her carefully. "Do you regret your decision?" Amelia thought about the question for a moment. Then she shook her head. "No." Her voice was steady. "Not yet." Alexander nodded once. "Good." He turned toward the door. "Because once this becomes public, there will be no turning back." Amelia looked down at the diamond ring on her finger. The stone glittered under the afternoon light. Somewhere inside the mansion, staff moved quietly through the hallways, preparing for the changes that were about to reshape the Hawthorne family forever. And for the first time since the betrayal, Amelia Carter felt something she hadn't expected. Power. Daniel Hawthorne had never been the kind of man who felt powerless. His entire life had been built around influence. Money. Connections. The Hawthorne name alone was enough to open doors most people never even saw. But the morning he received the call from his father, something felt different. Daniel had barely slept the night before. After Amelia walked out of the mansion, he had spent hours trying to reach her. Calling. Texting. Even driving to her apartment. But she never answered. Now his phone vibrated again on the bedside table. This time it wasn't Amelia. It was his father. Daniel frowned before answering. "Yes?" Alexander Hawthorne's voice was calm. "Come to the house this afternoon." Daniel rubbed his temples. "I'm busy today. Cancel whatever you have planned." There was no anger in Alexander's tone. No threat. Just quiet authority. Daniel sighed. "Fine. What's this about?" "You'll see when you arrive." The line went dead. 2 hours later, Daniel walked through the front doors of the Hawthorne mansion. The moment he stepped inside, something felt off. The staff were unusually quiet. Several of them avoided looking directly at him. Daniel frowned as he walked toward the main sitting room. His father was standing near the window, looking out over the gardens. "You wanted to see me?" Daniel asked. Alexander turned slowly. Yes. Daniel crossed his arms. If this is about last night. He stopped speaking. Because he suddenly noticed someone else standing in the room. Amelia. She stood calmly beside the fireplace, wearing an elegant black dress. For a moment Daniel thought he was hallucinating. Amelia, he said in disbelief. She looked at him. Her expression was calm. Controlled. Nothing like the devastated woman who had walked out of his bedroom the night before. What are you doing here? Daniel asked. Alexander answered before she could. She's moving in. Daniel blinked. I'm sorry, what? Alexander's voice remained steady. Amelia and I are engaged. For several seconds, Daniel simply stared at him. Then he laughed. A short, disbelieving laugh. That's not funny. Alexander didn't smile. Daniel turned toward Amelia. Tell him this is some kind of joke. Amelia met his eyes. It's not a joke. The color drained slowly from Daniel's face. You can't be serious. Alexander spoke calmly. The wedding will take place in 3 weeks. Daniel took a step backward. His mind struggled to process what he was hearing. You're marrying my father? He asked Amelia. Yes. Daniel looked back and forth between them. His expression shifted from confusion to anger. This is insane. Alexander raised an eyebrow. Why? Because she was my girlfriend. Daniel snapped. Was, Amelia corrected quietly. Daniel's jaw tightened. This is revenge. Amelia didn't deny it. Daniel turned toward his father again. You're doing this to humiliate me. Alexander's voice remained calm. No. He paused. I'm doing this to remind you that actions have consequences. Daniel clenched his fists. This will destroy the family. Alexander shook his head slowly. The only thing destroying this family is your behavior. The room fell silent. Daniel looked at Amelia again. For the first time, he truly saw the ring on her finger. A diamond large enough to catch the light from across the room. His father's family ring. Reality finally hit him. This was real. Amelia wasn't begging him to fix things. She wasn't crying. She wasn't trying to win him back. Instead, she had done something far worse. She had replaced him. And in that moment, Daniel Hawthorne realized something terrifying. The woman he had betrayed the night before was about to become his stepmother. 3 weeks passed faster than Amelia expected. From the outside, everything looked like a fairy tale wedding. The Hawthorne estate had been transformed into something breathtaking. White flowers lined the long garden walkway leading to the ceremony space. Crystal chandeliers hung beneath elegant white tents, reflecting the soft glow of hundreds of candles. The city's most powerful people had gathered to witness the event. Business leaders. Politicians. Influential families. All of them whispering about the same unbelievable news. Alexander Hawthorne was getting married. And his bride was someone no one expected. Amelia Carter. As Amelia stood in front of the mirror in her room, the wedding dress felt strangely symbolic. It was beautiful. Elegant. But it also represented something much deeper than romance. Transformation. The quiet social worker who once felt out of place in the Hawthorne mansion had disappeared. In her place stood someone new. Someone stronger. A soft knock came from the door. One of the staff members stepped inside. Miss Carter, it's time. Amelia nodded slowly. Her heart was calm. Steady. Nothing like the nervous excitement brides usually felt before a wedding. Because this wasn't about love. This was about power. As she stepped outside into the garden, the crowd fell silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward her. The whispers began almost instantly. Amelia could hear fragments of conversation as she walked slowly down the aisle. Is that Daniel's ex? Can this be real? She's marrying Alexander? But Amelia kept walking. At the end of the aisle stood Alexander Hawthorne. Calm. Confident. Waiting. The priest began the ceremony. The words blurred together in Amelia's mind. Promises. Commitments. Formalities. None of it felt as important as the moment she knew was coming. Because Daniel Hawthorne was there. She could feel his presence even before she saw him. He had arrived late. Uninvited. Standing near the back of the crowd. His face pale with disbelief. When their eyes finally met, the expression on his face was exactly what Amelia expected. Shock. Anger. Humiliation. The moment he realized what she had done. Amelia turned back toward Alexander as the priest asked the final question. Do you take Alexander Hawthorne to be your husband? Her answer came without hesitation. I do. Alexander's response followed immediately. I do. The priest smiled. Then I now pronounce you husband and wife. The applause that followed echoed across the garden. But Amelia barely heard it. Because she was looking directly at Daniel. And in that moment, Daniel Hawthorne understood something that would follow him for the rest of his life. The woman he once believed was too ordinary for his world. Had just become the most powerful woman in it. Amelia Carter was now Amelia Hawthorne. His father's wife. And his stepmother. The humiliation was complete. But Amelia knew something else. This was only the beginning. Because in the world she had just entered, power was never simple. And revenge always came with consequences. The days following the wedding felt like stepping into an entirely new world. News of the marriage spread across the city almost instantly. At first it was whispers. Then headlines. Then endless speculation. Business magazines called it the most shocking union the Hawthorne family had ever seen. Social media exploded with theories about why Alexander Hawthorne would marry his son's former girlfriend. Some called Amelia brilliant. Others called her dangerous. But one thing everyone agreed on was this. No one had ever embarrassed Daniel Hawthorne like this before. Inside the mansion, life slowly began to settle into a new routine. Amelia quickly realized that being Alexander Hawthorne's wife came with responsibilities far beyond luxury. Meetings. Public appearances. Charity events. Everywhere they went, people watched her carefully. Trying to understand who she really was. Trying to decide whether she was a victim, a strategist, or something far more complicated. Alexander, as always, remained calm through it all. He never treated Amelia like a trophy. Never like someone he had rescued. Instead, he treated her like a partner. Someone capable of learning the rules of the world he had spent decades building. You adapt quickly, he told her one evening during a dinner with several business executives. Amelia gave a small smile. I'm a fast learner. Alexander studied her thoughtfully. That may be your greatest advantage. But not everything in the Hawthorne family had settled so peacefully. Daniel avoided the mansion completely for the first 2 weeks after the wedding. When he finally returned for a business meeting, the tension in the house was impossible to ignore. The moment he saw Amelia sitting at the head of the table beside his father, his jaw tightened. But he said nothing. Because now the power dynamic had changed. Completely. Amelia noticed it in the way the staff treated her. In the way Daniel's associates spoke more carefully around her. And most of all, in the way Daniel avoided meeting her eyes. For the first time in his life, Daniel Hawthorne understood what it felt like to lose control. And Amelia knew he would never forget it. Late one evening, Amelia stood alone on the balcony overlooking the vast gardens of the Hawthorne estate. The city lights glowed in the distance, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Just weeks earlier, her life had been simple. Predictable. Safe. She had believed love was enough to protect her from betrayal. Now she knew better. Behind her, the balcony door opened quietly. Alexander stepped outside. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Alexander leaned against the railing beside her. "Do you regret it?" he asked. Amelia considered the question carefully. She thought about Daniel. About Victoria. About the moment her world had shattered in that bedroom. And about the path that moment had pushed her onto. Finally, she shook her head. No. Alexander studied her quietly. "You've changed," he said. Amelia looked out at the city lights again. "Yes." Her voice was calm. "But so has my understanding of the world." She turned toward him. "People underestimate quiet women." Alexander allowed himself a small smile. "That's often their greatest mistake." Amelia looked down at the diamond ring on her finger. The same ring that had once belonged to Alexander's grandmother. A symbol of power, strategy, and survival. Somewhere in the city, Daniel Hawthorne was still dealing with the consequences of his betrayal. But Amelia Carter was no longer the woman he had once taken for granted. She had stepped into a world of power. And she had learned something important. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's becoming someone they can never reach again. And in the quiet halls of the Hawthorne Empire, one truth had already become clear. The girl they thought was weak had become the most dangerous woman in the room.